Okay, welcome back. You're watching The Agenda. Let's stay with the Zimbabwe election story. And the Commonwealth Election Observer Mission statement on the elections in Harare has just ended. Let's now cross live to our reporter Chriselda Lewis there. A very good morning to you, Chriselda.
Well, a very good morning to you once again, Blaine. Of course, reaction pouring in following the scenes that we saw here in Harare in Zimbabwe yesterday, speaking to quite a number of people. Just an update. We're also hearing that there might be further scenes of violence within the city of Harare at this moment. Certainly, once we leave here, we'll try and bring you live coverage from there. But as you've indicated, the Commonwealth Election Observer team obviously giving a report on some of the scenes that we've seen and also regarding the election themselves. Let's join now His Excellency John Mahama, who is the head of this delegation. Thank you very much for your time, Your Excellency. Your Excellency, first of all, I think let's just start with what we saw develop in Harare yesterday. Your reaction to the scenes that we saw in the city?
I think that the incidents of yesterday were regrettable and unfortunate, and they are threatening to mar an otherwise successful process.
Your Excellency, obviously there had been some kind of dissatisfaction regarding the election results that had been announced at the time, and subsequently there were what are believed to be members of the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance who then marched on the gates of the results centre, and subsequently what's believed to have been excessive force that was used in trying to contain that situation that has led to 3 people dead now. Let's get your reaction to that first of all, and whether you believe that it was the right decision for the army to be called in.
Well, I believe that elections are a human enterprise, and there are bound to be anomalies of some sort. They must not be of the magnitude that they can mar the integrity of the process. But if people have legitimate concerns about things that happened during the elections, I believe that there are legal means to resolve these rather than resort to rioting. But at the same time, people do have a right to express themselves through demonstrations and other things. And I believe that when that happens, there are rules of engagement that the security services must apply. And I don't think one is firing live ammunition at people. I believe that probably the use of force was disproportionate.
With regard to the calling in of the army, the justification that has been given so far is that most police officers had been deployed to the polling stations and there was not enough manpower basically on the ground, hence the army was called in. Do you believe that was the right move? The army is obviously not trained for that kind of response, and the accusation now is that basically had attacked unarmed members or party faithful of the Movement for Democratic Change Alliance.
I think that the rules of engagement in most civilized countries is that the army is brought in as a last resort when law and order have completely broken down and the police is unable to handle the situation. In most cases, the police are trained to be able to handle riots like this. And so when the army comes in, then sometimes tragic incidents like what happened happen. I wouldn't know what the deployment of the police forces, but I do think that all this should have been anticipated. If proper planning were done, then it could have been anticipated that there could be demonstrations of this sort, and so it was necessary to have enough men in place to be able to control things. But I think what has happened is regrettable. The deaths are tragic and unfortunate, and they shouldn't have happened.
Are you saying that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission or authorities themselves were ill-prepared for what we saw in the streets?
It takes many stakeholders to make a successful election. The Electoral Commission has its part to play, the Media Commission has its part to play, the security services have their part to play. But I think that in all this there should be a coordination and there should be anticipation of what possibly could happen. If the excuse for bringing in the army is that there were not enough policemen on ground, then it means that the anticipation was not well done, because it was always likely that this was a possibility that could come out. I also think that the vacuum in releasing the results in a timely fashion is part of what contributes to this. Where there's a vacuum of communication, then people believe that something untoward is happening, and it normally would provoke the kind of reaction we saw yesterday.
Have you had any word perhaps with any of these stakeholders at this stage after having raised your concerns, of course? Because the concern, I guess, on the streets at this moment is that these election results are far from being announced fully. And with the kind of agitation that we're seeing on the streets, there's fear now that once whoever wins this election, they might resort back to violence.
The Electoral Commission is guided by law. And they have a period within which they should announce the final results. But I believe that even though the space giving for the final result to be announced, rather than wait and announce all the results at once, it is better to release those results as and when they are validated until a final declaration is made. For most election observation that I've seen, as results are received and validated, they are released, and then eventually a final declaration of the winner is made. This silence is creating a lot of anxiety, and I think that the Electoral Commission should, as speedily as possible, come out with the results. I hear there's a press conference this afternoon, and so I'm sure the ZEC will pronounce on what it's doing so far.
Just lastly, Your Excellency, obviously with Zimbabwe's application to be brought back into the Commonwealth, does this affect that in any way if we look at where we're standing at the moment?
Unfortunately, I'm no longer a member of the heads of government of Commonwealth. I'm a former president, so it doesn't lie with me to tell what instruments will be used to make that
But
assessment.
should it? Do you think it would?
I believe that this election is going to be one of the instruments that are used to assess Zimbabwe's preparedness to come back into the Union. But that will be a decision for the heads of government to make.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time joining us there, the head of the Commonwealth Election Observers Delegation, His Excellency, the former President of Ghana, John Mahama, telling us there that it's regrettable the scenes that we saw in the Harare city yesterday, saying that the army should have been the last resort that was brought in. And obviously, because the army is trained in war, basically, the police would have been the ones who were able to deal with the situation on the streets. That's much of the response that we're getting from the streets of Zimbabwe this morning, where many say that the army should have been the last resort, and basically putting the blame on the army for the 3 deaths that we have seen so far. But generally, in the run-up to the election and election day, the Commonwealth Election Observer team is happy with that. But of course, now following what we saw on the streets of Harare yesterday, they've said that it is regrettable and that it should not have happened.
Chriselda, I just want to take you back to your conversation with the Ngobizita Mlilo. Are you getting a sense that Tendai Biti is coming up as an unintended emerging figure in the Zimbabwean election narrative?
Look, Desiree, very difficult to say at this time, because you must recall at the point at where we're standing now, where the Zimbabwe Republic Police had called on Tendai Biti to come and account for some of what they believe was insightful behavior on his part when he addressed thousands of MDC Alliance supporters. It was at that very point where they declared basically victory in this election, and then we started seeing a sense of agitation on the part of some of the party faithful who then believed that this election was stolen, that it was not free and fair. When I did ask a bit earlier on as well, the spokesperson for the Zimbabwe Republic Police, whether Tendai Biti was being used as a scapegoat to try and perhaps get someone to blame for yesterday's violence, because you must recall that the MDC Alliance last night also called a press conference and said they were very concerned about the violence on the streets, not really wanting to take responsibility for that action. The Zimbabwe Republic Police essentially responded to me by saying they don't believe so. It's evident, the evidence is there, that Mr. Tendai Biti himself was inciting some of the MDC Alliance supporters and party faithful, and that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission was the only one who had the right to declare so far who was leading in this election. So a lot of blame being cast on him at this moment, and it'll be very interesting to see see a bit later on, after when he goes in to go and see the police, we've been promised that he will chat to the media. And once he has engagements with the Zimbabwe Republic Police, what those engagements were exactly about, because they will question him on what they believe was insightful behavior when he stood and spoke to the MDC Alliance Party faithful.
So two parallel processes underway right now. On the one hand, investigation of election violence, and on the other, the anticipated announcement of the presidential results. How's one affecting the other?
Well, at this stage, Desiree, what I heard from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission when I did speak to them is that they were trying to chart a way forward, because obviously there's a lot of agitation, as obviously also cited by the head of the Commonwealth Election Observers Mission, that with the delay of the presidential election results being announced, there's really a sense, in particular from members of the official opposition, that there might be some rigging or election fraud that is taking place. We can't confirm that, certainly, but the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission saying is if anybody has evidence of any wrongdoing within this election, that must be brought forward. And that's what we're also hearing from many of the role players, including the Commonwealth that has just had this media briefing, that if there's any such evidence to suggest that there may have been some problems or some challenges or election fraud, that needs to be brought forward. So I think, Desiree, moving forward, we're going to watch it very, very, very closely, because there's a lot of agitation at the moment on the streets of Zimbabwe, and basically what they want is those results to be released with immediate effect.
And we'll definitely be following those movements. Chriselda Lewis coming to us from Harare.